I'm Mitch Gallagher. Welcome to the Sweetwater Minute. This time out, a versatile control surface from PreSonus. Let's get started. Today we're checking out the FaderPort 8, a new control surface from PreSonus that operates in several different modes. You can connect natively to Studio One, as I'm showing here on my MacBook Pro. You can also run it in Huey mode, which allows you to connect to Pro Tools and other DAWs. If you're using Logic or other DAWs, you can access controls using Mackie control format. In addition to 8 touch-sensitive faders, which are using both for controlling volume and for addressing different parameters, we have full transport controls, controls for operating functions within your DAW, automation controls, controls for setting up how the control surface is working with your DAW, as well as a variety of other different functions. As I mentioned, the FaderPort 8 is compatible with just about any DAW, depending on what protocol you select. Choosing the protocol is very easy. Power off the unit, hold down the 2 select buttons on the first 2 channels, hit the power button again, and you're given the choice of 3 different protocols: Native Studio One, Mackie Control, and Huey. Once you've made your selection, we'll leave it set here to Studio One, hit exit, the unit will restart, and you're ready to get to work. The beauty of a control surface like the FaderPort 8 is that it allows you to get hands-on with what's happening inside your mix, inside your DAW, whether you're tracking, editing, or mixing. And we have functions here to address all 3 of those different aspects. We'll begin by taking a tour of the functionality of the FaderPort 8. To begin, we have 8 touch-sensitive faders here in the center. These are typically used to control volume. Simply slide, and of course the corresponding channel inside your DAW will change level as well. Whatever channel is selected, we can use the pan parameter button to address its panning. Press that to return to center. Or if we hit the pan switch here, now our faders control pan for the different channels. Our other fader modes include track mode, which is where we're addressing level inside the channel. Edit plugins, which allows us to select a plugin on a channel's insert and then control the parameters using the faders. And we'll take a look at how that works just a little bit later. We can also address the sends for a channel by pressing the send mode button. There are 2 ways we can control sends when we're in send mode. In this case, we've selected one channel, and the faders are going to control all the sends for that particular channel. If we hit Shift and press send again, now we can address one send across 8 different channels at a time. Now, of course, we aren't limited to just 8 channels inside our DAW. If you have more channels than that, you can access those using the next previous buttons, or go to bank mode by pressing the bank button, and you can use the controller to move among your channels. On the lower right of the FaderPort 8, we have our transport controls: stop, play pause, record, fast forward and rewind, and when you hit both of those simultaneously, you return to 0. And then we also have loop on and off for playback. On the top right of the FaderPort 8 is where we access our automation modes when we're mixing. We can set those to off, trim mode, latch, touch, write, or read. Those 8 automation buttons also have secondary functions. When we press the Shift key, either on the left side or the right side, the secondary function on latch is save, on trim it's redo, on off it's undo, and then we have 3 user buttons as well that we can assign to whatever function we desire. This section right here is called the Session Navigator section, and it's where we access major functions within your DAW. When we press Channel, we can use the encoder to scroll among the different channels inside our DAW. When we press the Zoom button, the encoder controls horizontal zooming inside our DAW. The previous and next buttons zoom us vertically. Selecting scroll allows us to use the encoder to move back and forth inside of our session. As I mentioned earlier, selecting the bank button allows us to navigate among the channels in our session when we have more than 8 channels available to us. In master mode, the encoder controls the level of the master fader. The click button turns our click on and off. Pressing the section button turns the encoder and the previous and next buttons into nudge controls for moving events inside a track. When we're in marker mode and we're playing back, we can drop markers by simply pressing the encoder, and you can navigate using the previous or next buttons. Each of those 8 mode buttons inside of the Session Navigator also have a secondary function, and we access that using the Shift key. When you do that, each of those buttons becomes one of the function keys on your computer keyboard. So holding Shift and pressing Channel is the same as pressing F1 on your keyboard, which in this case opens up the inspector. Pressing F2 opens up the editor, F3 opens the mixer, F4 opens up the browser, and so on. The vertical row of buttons next to the Session Navigator section on the FaderPort 8 allows us to choose what tracks are being displayed inside our FaderPort 8. So if we choose audio, we're just going to see the audio tracks. We've got 3 of those loaded into our session. I don't have any virtual instruments, but if I did, when I select VI, we'd see those in the FaderPort 8. Our buses are under the Next button, VCAs are under the Next, and all of the tracks will be displayed when we push the All button. Now once again, we have secondary functions on each of these buttons. So if we hold Shift and push Audio, we see all the inputs. Pressing VI gives us MIDI. Pressing Bus gives us the outputs. VCA gives us the effects. And All is a user assignable function. At the far left of the screen, we have more buttons for controlling functions. When we press the Arm switch, we can now record enabled tracks by pressing the select buttons. If we hold the Shift and press Arm, we get Arm All. All the tracks will be armed. Each channel strip in the FaderPort 8 has its own mute and solo button. Now if we select some of those, we can clear solo by pressing the Solo Clear button, or we can clear all the mutes simultaneously by pressing Mute Clear. The next 3 buttons on the left-hand side of the FaderPort 8, Bypass, Macro, and Link, pertain to functions that apply to a single channel. So if we select a channel and hit Bypass, for example, we'll bypass all of the effects inserts on that particular channel. Macro opens up the macro controls for that channel, and so on. Finally, we have the Shift key on both the left and right-hand side of the FaderPort 8, and this allows us to access the secondary functions under these various controls. 2 of the fader modes on the FaderPort 8 are very obvious. Track mode puts the faders in control of the levels on the various tracks. Pan, on the other hand, puts the pan control for each track under the fader. Edit Sends is also fairly clear. When we select that, if we have a send on a track, for example, I have a send here on my acoustic guitar that's feeding into a reverb here on my FX1 track. If we're in sends mode and we select that 3rd track, we can now use the fader to control that send level for that track. If we have multiple tracks with that same send on them, we can press Shift and send. And now at this point, we can address those send controls on all the different tracks simultaneously. Now let's check out the Edit Plugins fader mode. So we'll select that, and we're presented with our channel here. In this case, we're looking at the acoustic guitar channel, which has 1 channel strip plugin inserted on it. Let's go ahead and open that plugin up. When you do that, the parameters will be arrayed across the faders on the FaderPort 8. So now when we move those, we'll be moving the parameters inside the plugin. It's great to have hands-on control over your processors and effects in this way. The switches also function. Now, of course, many plugins have more parameters than just the 8 that are available under our faders here. You can custom assign those in the plugin window by clicking the gear, which opens things up and shows you the different controls in the FaderPort 8 and allows you to assign parameters inside the plugin to those controls. FaderPort 8 comes with a copy of Studio One Artist, so you can get started right away with that native control. And if you're already a Studio One user, you're going to be extremely happy with how integrated the FaderPort 8 is with what's happening inside your DAW. But we aren't limited to just PreSonus software with the FaderPort 8. As I mentioned, it has Huey modes as well as Mackie control modes, so you can access just about any DAW using the FaderPort 8's controls. Let's take a look at how it works with Pro Tools. So I switched over the FaderPort 8 into Huey mode and opened up Pro Tools on my MacBook Pro. Now at this point, we have full transport control. We could turn looping on and off for playback. We have fast forward, rewind, return to 0. We can drop markers. And so on. We can access all the functions that would be available in any Huey control surface. So we can zoom in and out. When we press scroll, we can access scrubbing inside Pro Tools. We can bank among the channels, we can access the master fader, turn the click on and off, and so on. So we have a lot of control over the different operating modes. We can also access our automation modes, off, trim, latch, touch, write, and read. If we go over to our mixer, we can see that the faders are controlling our faders. We can access pan on our selected channel. We can go into pan mode, just as we did inside Studio One, and see our tracks being panned by the faders. We can also insert a send and control that from FaderPort 8. So let's go ahead and put a send in here. We'll just assign it to bus 5 and 6. Once we have a send inserted on our track, we go into sends mode, select that send, and now we can access that using our fader. Now, as with Studio One, we can always see the value of what's being done by the fader here on our screen at the top. And in both Studio One and in any other DAW you have connected, if you hit Shift and the encoder button, you'll see the meters. We have a variety of other functions that we can control from FaderPort when we're using Huey or Mackie control devices. For example, we can insert plugins, choose what plugins are on a track. As I showed you, you can work with sends. So you can take control of all the functions that are available in the Huey protocol, and it allows you to really get hands-on with what's happening inside your DAW. I hope you've enjoyed this look at the PreSonus FaderPort 8. This control surface allows you to get totally hands-on with your DAW. If you're working with PreSonus Studio One, whether the included Studio One Artist or one of the other versions, you really have tightly integrated control between the FaderPort 8 and what's happening in your computer. If you're working with another DAW, such as Pro Tools, Logic, Cubase, Sonar, Live, just about any other DAW, you can control that using Huey or Mackie control protocols. It's a very nice control surface that allows you that tactile approach to operating your DAW. Thanks for joining me for the Sweetwater Minute. I'm Mitch Gallagher.